Welcome, everyone, to Macro Social Work Stories, where your life experience, your journey, your perspective will be valued, heard, challenged, but respected. Today, we have a wonderful guest who will share her social work journey. And we're going to begin with some questions that talked about from her interests, some of the skills that she brings to the table, her challenges and success as she reflect give her perspective on her social work, macro social work, and other experiences as we look at our time together today. So we want to welcome Miss Sabrina Kiser to our show today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes. We'd like to begin our podcast, our time together with can you tell us an interesting fact about yourself?
So I would say one that speaks a lot about me is that I was the ringleader of my kindergarten circus, and I feel like it was just kind of life went from there. So
Yes. So a leader at a young age in that process. So, as we look at leadership and social work, how does leadership connect to your experience in social work?
I have been in leadership positions for quite some time now, actually. I always uh, would seek out leadership positions even as a kid, as I said, as a 5-year-old, but also even through middle school, high school, was definitely in either classes or would take opportunities in leadership roles, being captain of this or that, vice president in this school group or president in another one. Even through college, I did the same thing, being a resident assistant in RA, being the senior RA, being on a lot of student groups that would help me develop my leadership skills. That's something that I've also really been interested in, is developing my leadership skills, not just keeping things status quo. And so I've been, even in my probably, second serious social work type job. I was a senior case manager, and I asked to bring on an intern so that I could again hone the skills of leadership and supervising, seeing how do you mentor, how do you bring somebody, kind of to that next spot. And happy to say that intern was not even really considering social work. She was looking more at child welfare, child development,
Okay.
but kind of was considering social work. And now she's a hospital social worker
Okay.
and graduated with her MSW a couple of years ago. So
Yeah.
that's really been something that I have valued over the years and continue to really read a lot of books on, follow, a lot of leadership podcasts. I just did a Dare to Lead training, which was 6 weeks with the wonderful Dr. Lakia Cherry from the Network for Social Work Management. If you're
Yes.
interested in macro things, that is the place.
Yes.
And that was also really helpful in continuing my development of my leadership
Mm,
style.
yes. So Dr. Cherry and other mentors who are doing some great things in macro and organizations. Um, what sparked your interest into leadership as a in the social work profession?
I um, really saw a lack of positional leaders when it comes to the social work profession. So there might be a lot of people who are leaders on their team or who are supervising teams that are social workers and have their MSWs or their BSWs, or their DSWs, but are not actually in positions of positional leadership within organizations. A lot of the organizations I have worked in and have worked with have either people who are business folks, maybe masters of public health, um, and who don't have the experience and the perspective and positioning of a social worker, who are put in leadership positions to run social work and social welfare type agencies, organizations. And I see that as a really huge gap in education, but also just in regular practice that we see. So I wanted to make sure that I was in a position that um, when I would get promoted, that I would also have the leadership skills and the business skills to be able to be successful in that position, because I definitely see that sometimes they put social workers in leadership positions without preparing social workers for those positions. They think you're a good clinician, so you'll probably be a good executive director, and that's not necessarily true. While also on the other side seeing business folks be put in positions of power in social work agencies that don't actually understand our training, our code of ethics, and the way that social workers specifically approach the work.
Interesting. Yes. When I reflect upon my experiences and leadership, many times social workers, non-social workers, were placed in leadership positions, and there has to be a delicacy where one has the business aspect as well as the skill set to interact, engage, build that rapport, finances, all those different things are needed as a leader in that process. So, as we look at your journey into social work leadership, we were talking earlier about your transition, Virginia, LA. So, what are some of your experiences working in Virginia as a social worker?
Sure. So I started out in direct practice. I was a case worker and then a case manager. As I finished up my MSW, I was a full-time case manager. But I also for my MSW program, I was at George Mason, and that's in Virginia. And we had a social change, essentially a macro
Focus.
track at that point, which was really fantastic and wonderful, and really brought me into my love of politics, not just for fun and not just as a hobby, but as an actual profession.
Yeah.
And so I had my internship in a at this agency called Mental Health America, which
Hmm.
was doing policy. I was a policy intern, and they happened to have some turnover while I was there, and I got thrown into the deep end
Yes.
real quick as an intern because their lead federal policy person left midway through,
Hmm.
and I just kind of picked up a lot of their responsibilities, and just absolutely loved every minute of it. And so I was at another organization as my full-time case management job, and I was like, gosh, I wish I could stay with, I'll probably end up talking about it. So I was at Salvation Army, and I still am. And
Hmm.
I was like, gosh, I wish they would have some type of policy work that I could do. And lo and behold, about 2 weeks later, I was asked to interview for a policy position. And then I did policy for the following 6 years, ending up being the policy director for the Salvation Army. And with that, I was able to develop the strategy going forward. There really wasn't much there was no policy work going on, no policy advocacy work going on. And so I was able really to develop the strategy for that and figure out what that was going to look like, what are going to be policy priorities. Obviously, working within leadership and figuring out what is the mission of the organization, and then how does those policy practices fit into that mission. And so I did that, and I loved it, but DC got really exhausting. If you have ever been to like New York City, I'm originally from New York,
Okay.
or DC, any of these East Coast cities, it's a super high energy at all
Right.
times, and it's a really intense energy and feeling. And I just knew that I needed to take a step back from that, and a position became available in Los Angeles County. And so I applied for that position and ended up getting that. So now I've been in LA for the past year and a half, where I oversee social services for the Western United States. And so, making sure that people, trying to figure out what are best practices, sharing that with the field, as well as program evaluation, expanding a lot of different programs that we're doing, and trainings, all of that fun stuff. So we can talk more
Right.
about that.
So policy was the kind of the entrance into the macro social work policy, kind of thrown into the aspect of looking at what can we do. A position open up and expose you to how policy and practice are interconnected. There's integration, and many times we like to separate micro, meso, and macro. And so, as you were looking at policy, um, how can you share the connection between the policy and the micro?
Oh, this is my favorite thing. I have a whole presentation that I do sometimes called, I have like a very fancy policy title for it, but
Mm-hmm.
then in parentheses, I call it politicians are people too. And that is the key, is that we have so many transferable skills as social workers, particularly for folks doing direct practice. There are so many transferable skills over to policy practice,
Mm-hmm.
because politicians are just people.
Yeah.
Their staffers are just people. And if social
Yeah.
workers know anything, it's how to work with people.
Yes.
And so that would be how I orient myself in policy. So a couple of examples of like, what does that actually look like in practice? When I know that I'm going to go see a certain member of Congress, or if I know that I'm going to, go to that office,
Mm-hmm.
I do a biopsychosocial on the member of Congress
Okay.
that I can bring with me,
Okay.
because there's a ton of information about them on the internet. There's
Mm-hmm.
a ton of personal information that you can find out. And so I have a whole section that's just that basic demographic information,
Interesting.
religion, family, where are they originally from, where do they go to
Yes.
school, what's their background work wise.
Mm-hmm.
And then also on the other side, doing more of the policy connection. So how do the policies that this person advocates for, what bills have they introduced, what
Yes.
bills have they co-signed,
Mm-hmm.
what bills have they sponsored, that work in conjunction with whatever I'm trying to achieve in
Yes.
that social change realm.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we can make those connections. So I do that, but also the other really huge thing is that there aren't enough social workers. There are not enough direct practitioners who are doing this work in Congress or even in the administration.
Yes.
And so I would go to meetings. At one point, my favorite story is the probably 2015. It was House Ways and Means Committee. They were wanting to completely change how all the benefit structures work. And so
Okay.
basically combining all of your benefits into one lump sum and
Mm-hmm.
then using it how you need to, which isn't a terrible idea. There are just like a lot of other elements to it that we needed to work on.
Yeah.
And so there was a big like waste, fraud, and abuse. We need to make sure there's no waste, fraud, and abuse in benefit programs.
Mm-hmm.
And one of these staffers who I always say Congress is a place of privilege. There's a lot
Yeah.
of reasons for that, and we can talk
Yes.
about that too. But these staffers, I was in my 20s, they were in their 20s, so that way we were pretty comparable. But a lot of them come from a place of privilege and
Yeah.
have never had to do things like apply for SNAP, or they don't know what that process is like. So
Mm-hmm.
I would be able to say, okay, because they were like, they should recertify every 2 months for benefits. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
And they didn't understand why that wasn't okay. And so I had to figure out, again, using those social work skills, how do I get you where I need you to go?
Yes.
Or how do I
Right.
get you to the place
Mm-hmm.
that it's like I use motivational interviewing the entire time.
Yes.
And like, okay, so what's the goal that you're trying to achieve here?
Yes.
And then I'd be like, okay, have you ever lost your social security card or your driver's license? Or have
Yes.
you ever gone to the DMV? Now
Yes.
let's do that with a baby that's not allowed to eat during the day, and you're not allowed to, you don't have any paid sick days from work if you're working, and all of the things.
Yes.
And I had a staffer say, one of them goes, this can't be that bad. It cannot be that bad. And I said, you should go apply. You should try, because
Yeah.
VCU at the time would always have their MSW students apply for benefits.
Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course, as a social worker, I would go with my clients
Mm-hmm.
sometimes if they needed an advocate. And I would be like, yeah, no, it really is that bad. And then as I was leaving, the other staffer said, this is why we need more social workers and people like you here, because we don't actually know what happens when we implement these policies. And to me, that solidified the reason I was doing the work I was doing.
Yeah, that's wonderful. You talked about preparation, doing a biopsychosocial on the politician prior to see where you can connect, where
Mm-hmm.
their lived experience can connect with the social change that you desire to bring about during that time period. And empathy, having the staffers look at it from another perspective. All those are things in which we
Mm-hmm.
can utilize in those various settings. I'm trying to tell my
Mm-hmm.
students all the time where there's people, like you stated, social workers are needed.
Yep.
social workers are needed in that process. So you did the policy aspect of it.
Mhm.
You're able to work with staffers, able to work with legislators,
Mhm.
and now you're working in on the West Coast. And so, uh, what was some of the transition? What was the transition like? Work leaving the East Coast to the West Coast.
Um, well, I moved here in October of 2019, but then I was gone for about a month and a half for meetings and traveling. That's one thing I think that uh, a lot of social workers don't realize that they could do is travel for work.
Hmm.
And so, besides just travel social worker positions that you could get, I probably went to 20 different states by working at the national office
Mm,
for work.
okay.
Because I would, in order to advocate for people, I have to be able to know what people are dealing with and what they're going through.
Yes.
And so, what that would look like is if I had to go for a board meeting we have a national advisory board in the
Hmm.
organization, and so we change where the board meetings are. So I would go to a board meeting, and I also, for my staff who are not social workers, they're more policy folks,
Hmm.
MPPs, MPHs. Um, for my staff, I would say before and or after you go to any conference, any meeting out of town, you have to go on site visits.
Yeah.
And so every time we would go on site visits and we would, I always ask for an hour with a case manager. I don't want to just get the, you know, tour of the facility. I know what a facility looks like. I know what an apartment looks like. I know what a transitional program looks like.
Hmm.
So it's nice to see that, but I would always ask for time with case managers so that I could really understand what's going on with clients. And then if I saw clients in the hallway, I would start chit chatting with them just so I can really
Hmm.
get a feel for them. And sometimes I would actually ask if I could talk more in depth with a client, if I could sit with a client for a little while and just kind of get their story, understand what they're going through, so that I could be a better advocate on the Hill. Because um, you know, I I did direct practice. I keep up on issues, but there's nothing like that lived experience.
Yes.
And I wanted to make sure I could actually know, have those stories, meet those people, figure out what their lived experience is, and then how do I translate that to advocacy? And then similarly in this position, before COVID, I was able to
Hmm.
go up to our sites in San Francisco and go do site visits and go meet with people and see what the issues in San Francisco are and
Hmm.
where do we need more training, where do we need to which programs could use additional assistance and in which ways. What are those consistencies so that I could do them for the entire region? So again, I have 13 Western United States plus um, some territory, so Guam, Micronesia.
Okay.
And yeah, so it goes all the way out there. And
Mm,
it's really important to see what's going on at the ground level so that I know what they need and how, or so I can find out from them specifically what they need instead of me guessing from up here in this office where I don't, where I don't get to see people.
yeah,
And I
that's vital.
also,
Vital.
yeah,
Vital.
yeah, exactly. I also will go and volunteer, or it's work day,
Hmm.
but I'll go do food distribution. I will go to after school programs just so I can make sure I am in touch with the people who are doing the work and who are receiving services, so that I can try to do the best job I can do here. But the transition is funny. There are some little quirks about the East Coast and West Coast that I find really interesting. One of them is that on the West Coast, people are not as committed to appointments as we are on the East Coast.
Hmm.
If I make a lunch, if I make a lunch appointment with you on the East Coast, I will do it 2 weeks beforehand and we will both get there 5 minutes early. West
Hmm.
Coast, not the same. So having to even just get used to how people work and how people function here
Yeah.
has been a little bit different.
Yeah.
And also just the from a political standpoint, the policies that drive and the progressive policies that drive the West Coast compared to, I was working in the Midwest, I was working in the South.
Mm.
There are definitely different um, social realities that I am getting used to here that I didn't really have the same interactions with when I was in different parts of the country.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So similarities, differences, and the political, I guess, systems that they're a part of. as you look at the different regions that we work
Mhm.
with. When we talk about travel social work, because many times we have social workers who just think of traditional social work as stationary, stagnant. Uh, what would you tell a student who may be thinking about entering the social work field?
If I mean, so there's always the lovely travel social work positions where you can get a 6-week job and they pay really, really well,
Hmm.
and you kind of go in there, do triage, and come out. We have some jobs actually open right now for folks working with migrants who are released from DHS custody
Yes.
into shelter so that they can be reunited with their sponsor.
Hmm.
And so we have travel social workers coming in for that
Okay.
because we don't have enough social workers here. And so there are those type of opportunities. But for me, I always think if you're in a regional office or if you're in a national office, if you are looking at macro,
Hmm.
you're going to have the opportunity to travel all across the country
Hmm.
or all across your region. So
Okay.
again, I'm in a territory, so I will be, without COVID, once we're safer to travel, I'll be able to go to programs in Idaho. I've
Hmm.
never been to Idaho, but I'll be able to see what is it like there and how can I make the work easier for folks that are doing it in these regions that I've never been to. So
Yeah.
yeah, as a student, if that's something that interests you, I think that being in a national office or a regional office, a lot of time if you're into program evaluation, program reviews,
Hmm.
those are positions where you get to travel a lot if you're in a larger organization. I think the other thing is be open to international organizations. I
Yes.
have a lot of friends who did recovery work in Haiti. I have friends who one of my really good friends. She's a public health worker, but her job is economic security in international development, and so she'll fly over to Mozambique. She'll fly to Japan and do work after disasters, typically.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah, disaster social work is definitely another way to be able to get that travel bug and have be able to work at the same time. So if you want a bit more of that flexibility, disaster social work is another really great way to do that. And I actually love disaster mental health. You can be a
Yeah.
mental health worker in Red Cross usually does this, Salvation Army does it too. But you can actually be a mental health worker in a congregate site
Hmm.
for people who have been displaced from disasters in the US or
Okay.
internationally.
Yeah. Yeah. There's many opportunities that social workers can be exposed to working with displaced populations,
Mm-hmm.
working with disaster relief, working with it can be a crisis that we're dealing with in our time period. We do know that because of COVID-19, there's going to be a surgence, emergence, a need for social workers, practitioners, globally, nationally,
Mm-hmm.
locally, to address the impact of COVID-19. And so, disaster relief, working with displaced workers will prepare social workers and other practitioners to meet the needs, the immediate needs of communities to bring about desired change. Yes. So, as we wrap things up, we talked about policy.
Mm-hmm.
Talked about how policy really was your what interest into the social work field. Then you talked about the leadership and how many times social workers may or may not have the opportunity to be prepared for those various positions, and you position yourself to have the skill set, the engagement skills, also the macro skills and business skills, so that you can be an effective leader in that process. Um, any nuggets you want to leave with as we wrap things up on today?
Yeah, I think one thing that in these leadership positions we notice, a lot of times we'll hear social workers say social workers don't get paid at all.
Hmm.
And I am a big advocate of paying social workers. I was one of the people who was offered a position where I would have been on SNAP and Medicaid if I would have taken that position at the rate that they were going to pay.
Say it
Um,
again. Say it again.
I would have been on SNAP and Medicaid if I would
Mhm.
have taken the position at
Yeah.
the rate that they offered.
Yeah.
So I negotiated and said, if you would like me to work for you, I need to be able to afford my own rent and
Yeah.
health insurance. and
Yeah.
food, and to be able to pay my student loans. We all
Yes.
have a lot of student loans.
Yes.
So I would say definitely, if that is a concern for folks, there are ways that, number one, we can advocate within our organizations
Hmm.
for higher pay. We can advocate for ourselves personally for higher pay. But also, if you put yourself into a place where you can get into a leadership position, pay there is better. And then we have a little bit more control of how much the people under us get paid.
Yeah.
And so then we can actually influence some change there. I wish that it was easier, and I wish that obviously that we would see social workers as a value to society and pay them accordingly, but that's
Yes.
not the case, and we all know that. I'm not, saying anything groundbreaking,
Hmm.
but I do think that you do not have to be in poverty and have your MSW or, have a master's degree. And so I think that that's something that we all have to work towards, and we all have to really advocate for within our organizations, and within political structures, because a lot of times social workers are going to be paid what the grant or what the per diem tells you can be paid.
Yeah.
And that's something that's set at a policy level. That's political. That is actually political social work right there, is
Yeah.
being able to advocate for those higher pay rates. And not saying it's easy, and not saying it's something that can always happen. But I think it is something that if you are able to be in a position of power and leadership, that you can advocate for regularly, and then at least feel like it makes some difference or influence some folks to recognize the value of service, and that we don't have to go into this wonderful, fulfilling field and just be like, I get paid and feeling fulfilled. Like, we need to actually be able to pay our bills too. And that's something that we should really always talk about. And again, the organization I work for is definitely not perfect with this, and it's something that I'm advocating for at all times. But also, I know that a lot of times, like I said, that's dictated by grants and
Yes.
how much you're allowed to pay your staff
Yeah.
with a grant. So again, that's something that needs to be advocated for on a political level, locally, statewide, and federally.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very important. Equity. We have social workers, individuals thinking about social worker, the field of social work, and when you look at the salaries, the
Mm-hmm.
opportunities, the debt that you may encounter as a result of obtaining your degree, you have to decide: is this the right field for me? And so, it's our job as leaders,
Yeah.
as in different positions, to make sure that we prepare the next generation to have equitable wages, not just livable wages, equitable wages, like other professions that bring about desired change with individuals, families, and communities and organizations. So thank you for being with us on today on Macro Social Work Stories. And we look forward to hearing how things will continue for you as you lead, guide. And thank you for sharing your story on today.
Thank
Thank you.
you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. This was fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you.